You talk a lot about how small habits make a big difference. I think people sometimes might push back and say, no, you got to do really big things. Can you unpack the reason why you believe small habits are so important for us?
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple different things to think about here. One is more strategic and one is maybe a little more tactical. So I'll cover both. So the strategic reason or the philosophical reason why small habits make a big difference is that they compound over time. They kind of add up and multiply. And this is easy to dismiss because it doesn't really feel like that on any given day, right? Like the difference between getting 1% better or 1% worse, or making a slightly positive habit or falling into a slightly negative one, it doesn't really feel like a whole lot on any given day. Like what is the difference between, eating a burger and fries for lunch or eating a salad? On any given day, it's not really a whole lot. Your body looks basically the same in the mirror at the end of the night. Scale hasn't really changed that much. It's easy to dismiss one way or another. But you turn around 5 years or 10 years down the line and you realize, wow, those daily choices really do add up. All of a sudden you're 30 pounds heavier than you thought you would be, or so on. And that's true not just for, diets and weight, but for all kinds of things. Like reading one book doesn't make you a genius, but if you commit to a habit of lifelong learning, well, reading each day can be transformative. And so your habits kind of multiply and surprise us in that way. They set us on a very different trajectory depending on what those daily habits are, even though they don't feel like much on any given day. So that's kind of the philosophical answer, the strategic answer. If you get 1% better each day, you end up in a very surprising place 2 or 5 or 10 years later. But then there's also a more tactical piece to it, which you mentioned, just a moment ago. 40 to 50% of your behaviors on a given day are habitual. So things like tying your shoes or unplugging the toaster after each use or brushing your teeth. And the technical definition for a habit is a behavior that has been repeated more or less enough times to be automatic. So, something that you can do pretty much without thinking, like brushing your teeth. And that's actually what a habit is. That's those 40 to 50% of your daily behaviors, all those things that you are doing on autopilot, like covering your mouth every time you laugh or apologizing each time before you ask a question. Oh, I'm sorry, but, whatever. And we don't think about those things, whether they're habits of thought or habits of action. But they often, even despite how small they are, they often set or determine how we spend the next chunk of time. So take, for example, the habit of pulling your phone out of your pocket. It's a really small habit. You do it, pretty much automatically. It only takes a second or two. But once you've done that habit, well, you might think consciously. You might make a careful decision about what to do next. Do I play a video game, or do I open my email? Do I respond to this email from my boss, or do I check social media or read an article on the web? And you can do all of those things from your phone, but whether you do those things or not was pretty much determined by, did you take your phone out of your pocket? And so habits they're kind of like the entry point for the next chunk of behavior. And so for that reason, they also have like this outsized impact. They might only be 40 to 50% of your behavior by themselves. But if you add up the things that you do because of where your habits led you, well, then maybe it's 70 or 80 or even 90% of your behavior that's influenced or impacted by your habits each day.
One of the things, James, that you talked about that I've underlined it, circled it, highlighted it, quoted it, replayed it. You said this, you said, winners and losers have the same goals, but they have vastly different results. And I love that. And then you started talking about systems. You said, we don't have a goal problem, but we have a system problem. The quote that stood out is this, and I'd love for you to talk about it. What do you mean by system? But you say this, you don't rise to the level of your goals, but you fall to the level of your system. Can you put some color to that for me, please?
So, a lot of the time when we begin the process of change or something that we want to achieve, when we think about an outcome we want, we think about setting a goal, about achieving a particular result. But as you mentioned, I think something people often overlook is that winners and losers in any particular domain often have the same goals. If you have 100 people that apply for a job, well, they all have the goal of getting the job. Or if you have, a dozen athletes competing in the Olympics, they all have the goal of winning the gold medal. So goals, this is not to say goals are useless. Like, they might be necessary, but not sufficient, right? Like, goals are good for setting a sense of direction, for determining, clarity and where you're going to direct your effort. But once you've done that, which happens fairly early on in most processes, I think it's more useful to focus on the system rather than the goal. And so what do I mean by that? Well, your system is the collection of habits and processes, the collection of behaviors that prepare you and help you execute on whatever that goal is. And, sports offers a good example or metaphor here. If you're an athlete or a sports team, your goal is to win the championship or to have the best score on the scoreboard at the end of the game. But if you spent the whole game looking at the scoreboard, thinking only about the goal, you would perform terribly, right? And conversely, if you didn't look at the scoreboard at all and focused only on the process, on the system of running better plays, being in the right position, preparing for the next play well, then you probably would have the best score on the scoreboard at the end of the game. And so this is kind of the surprising thing, is that we set goals because we want better outcomes, but ironically, the way to actually get better outcomes is often by not thinking about the result, by ignoring the goal and pouring all of your energy and effort into building a better system.
If we're doing the right things that lead to the wins, then the wins are going to take care of themselves. And I think as leaders, if we can create those right habits, then success tends to follow. If we're just pursuing success, we may not necessarily know how to get there. And so I want you to unpack a little bit more in that line of thinking, because we all want to change bad habits. We all want to adopt good habits. But you seem to believe that a lot of people are trying to change the wrong thing, or they're trying to do it in the wrong way. What is it that we often get wrong?
Well, so I just want to say two things here. So first, before I answer this particular question, just follow up a little bit on what you hinted at there. The outcomes that you want, whether it's in business or personal life, are often a lagging measure of the behaviors that preceded them. So, we think about losing weight, or we think about earning more money or hitting a quarterly revenue goal, or we think about, writing a book. But those things are often the lagging measure of the habits, right? Like, your weight is a lagging measure of your eating and nutrition habits. Your bank account is a lagging measure of your financial habits. Your manuscript length is a lagging measure of your writing habits, and so on for many different areas of life. And so I think that helps encapsulate a little bit the relationship that I think of between systems and habits and outcomes and goals, is that if you focus on the habits, then the outcomes sort of follow naturally. Now, your second point about focusing on the wrong thing, this I think is a natural consequence of the fact that we often focus on the goal rather than the system. So when most people set out to change something, they build what I would call an outcome-based habit. So they might say something like, all right, I want to lose weight, so my goal is to lose 40 pounds in the next 6 months. And in order to do that, I need to come up with a plan. So then they say, well, I'm going to follow this diet program, and I'm going to work out 4 days a week. And usually the conversation stops there, and they think, well, once I've followed this plan and lost this weight, then I'll be the person that I want to be. Then I'll have the identity that I want to have. And my argument is that I think it's more fruitful, more productive, often just more useful to invert that process. So rather than focusing on the outcome, let's focus on the identity and let the outcome follow naturally from there. So rather than saying, all right, I want to lose 40 pounds in 6 months, let's ask ourselves the question, well, who is the type of person that could lose 40 pounds? Well, maybe it's the type of person who doesn't miss workouts. And as soon as you have that question or have that line of thinking, it changes the way that you approach it. If you just say, I want to lose 40 pounds as fast as possible, well, then you do all kinds of things. It's like, well, maybe I'll do a radical juice cleanse, or maybe I join a CrossFit gym or do P90X or something like that. And you get injured, or you get sick, or you burn out. But if you invert it and focus on the identity rather than the outcome, then you say, well, how can I be the type of person who doesn't miss workouts? Well, maybe I just do 5 push-ups a day, right? Or maybe I show up at the gym for 5 minutes. And no, those things aren't going to radically transform your body overnight, but it does reinforce the identity of being the type of person who works out every day. It helps cast a vote for that new identity. And I think that in the beginning, that's the biggest hurdle to cross. It's not getting the scale to move. It's looking at yourself in a new way. It's starting to believe this is part of my identity. This is who I am. I just write one sentence every day, or I'm the type of person who puts on their running shoes after work each day, or I'm the type of person who meditates for 1 minute. Those are not ambitious, amazing habits, but they are reinforcing and casting a vote for being a new type of person, for having that identity. And once you're there, then I think you're in a good position to expand and upgrade and continue the process of change. A lot of the time when people talk about changing, they talk about things like phrases like fake it till you make it. But what I'm talking about is a little bit different than that, because fake it till you make it is asking you to believe something about yourself that you don't yet have evidence for, right? Like, oh, just, think of yourself as a fit person, or think of yourself as a meditator, or believe that you can do it. And I don't think that there's anything necessarily wrong with, thinking positively about yourself. It's not like it's going to hurt anything, but we have a word for beliefs that don't have evidence. We call it delusion, right? Like at some point, your brain doesn't like this conflict. I keep saying I'm a healthy person, but I'm not actually working out, and it doesn't stick. And so I think that if you want habits to stick in the long run, it's more useful to approach it from the other direction, to let the behavior lead to the belief. And this is sort of what you're referencing here. Like you use small habits as a way to prove to yourself that you are that kind of person, right? Like in a sense, your habits are kind of how you embody a particular identity. Like every time that you go to church, you embody the identity of someone who is religious. Every time that you make your bed, you embody the identity of someone who is clean and organized. Each time that you sit down and write one sentence, you embody the identity of someone who is a writer. And eventually, if you cast enough small votes for that person, if you reinforce that identity in small ways, then you start to actually think that about yourself, because you can look back on this body of evidence that you have and say, yeah, that's who I am. And this is why I like to say that, every action you take is like a vote for the kind of person that you think that you are, or the kind of person that you wish to become. And so if you just keep casting votes, even if they're in very small ways, then you start to look at yourself in a new way. And I think ultimately, true behavior change is really identity change. It's really internalizing that belief that, no, this is who I am. And once you get to that point, you're not even really pursuing behavior change anymore. You don't even really have to motivate yourself to do the right thing. This is why you'll hear people say yeah, I don't motivate myself to go to the gym. It's just what I do. It's just part of who I am. Or I don't have to push myself to meditate. It's just part of my identity now. And once you see yourself as that kind of person, then it just requires less willpower and discipline and motivation to do those things. And so that's why I think that those small votes are so meaningful, even though they seem tiny at the time.